Pack your bags and leave. My dad screamed. So I did, no questions asked. For months later, he emailed me, "Why's the power off?" I said, "Not my house, not my problem." Then everything changed. I'm Adrian, 38 years old, and I never imagined I'd be writing a post like this about my own family. But here we are. The story starts with a pretty simple situation that spiraled into something I couldn't have predicted. It's about my dad, Harold, and how one moment changed everything between us. A little background first. I'd been living with my dad for about a year before all this blew up. I lost my job in the early part of 2024 when the company I worked for downsized unexpectedly. I was shocked, but it wasn't like I hadn't dealt with setbacks before. The plan was temporary. I'd stay at Dad's place, get back on my feet, and then move out. He lives alone in a modest two-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood about 30 miles from the city center. Harold's always been difficult. That's the nicest way I can put it. He's 67, retired military, very set in his ways, and has a way of making people feel like everything has to revolve around him. I think it comes from how strict and disciplined he was when I was a kid. He never said, "I love you," growing up, and he had very high expectations. Sometimes I still wonder if he thinks I'm just an extension of his will or a failure, depending on the day. When I first moved in, things were awkward but bearable. I was sleeping in the spare bedroom that used to be my old childhood room, which had been turned into a mini office for him. I kept to myself mostly, applied for jobs during the day, and tried to help out around the house. I made a point to pay some rent, a small amount, and I helped with groceries when I could. But Dad made it clear early on that I was living under his rules, and those rules were non-negotiable. No loud music, no friends over, lights out by 10 p.m. at the latest. The kitchen was his domain, and heaven forbid I leave a dish unwashed in the sink. At first, I chalked some of his attitude up to stress. He was retired, dealing with his own issues, and I was a guest in his home. But over time, the criticism got sharper and more personal. One evening, about 3 months into my stay, I made the mistake of coming home late from a job interview. I was tired, frustrated, and I forgot to take off my muddy shoes in the hallway. I kicked them off by the door instead of into the closet like Dad had insisted. When he saw, his face twisted. "Adrian, what is wrong with you? Do you think this is some kind of hotel?" His voice was low but harsh. "Clean up your mess or pack your bags. I'm not your maid." I apologized and cleaned up immediately, but the look on his face made it clear he was fed up. The real breaking point came a few weeks later. I'd found a temp job at a local warehouse, but the shifts were long and exhausting. One Saturday morning, I slept in a little later than usual, and when I finally got up, I went to make coffee. The smell must have been enough to rile him up because he appeared in the kitchen suddenly, scowling. "You call that coffee? You burn the beans," he snapped. "You're wasting everything I buy. You can't do anything right in this house." I tried to explain that it was just a mistake, that I could make another pot, but he wasn't interested in hearing it. "Why don't you just leave? Pack your bags and leave right now. I'm done with your nonsense." His voice was loud this time, bordering on yelling. The neighbors might have heard. I froze for a moment, not sure if this was real or some kind of cruel joke. But he meant it. I packed a bag. No argument, no protest. I took my phone, some clothes, and left. The door closed behind me, and that was it. I stayed at a friend's place that night. The next morning, I didn't answer any calls from Dad. I didn't want to talk to him. But more than that, I didn't know what to say. In the following weeks, I found a small apartment with a roommate, started a new job, and tried to rebuild my life. I told myself that maybe this was for the best. Maybe I needed space from him to grow up and figure things out on my own. For 4 months, I heard nothing from him. No texts, no calls, no emails. I thought maybe he was trying to teach me a lesson or that maybe he was just angry. Then, out of nowhere, I got an email. It was from Dad's old email address, the one he barely uses. The subject line was simple, just one sentence. "Why's the power off?" I opened the email carefully, thinking maybe it was a prank or some kind of mistake. The message said, "The electric got shut off at the house. Fix it." I stared at those words for a long time. Fix it. I haven't lived there for 4 months. I haven't paid a single bill there since I left. Why was he expecting me to handle this? I didn't reply immediately. I thought about ignoring it entirely. But then, almost without thinking, I wrote back, "Not my house. Not my problem." That was it. I didn't want to get sucked back in, didn't want to be the family doormat anymore. After I hit send on that email, Not my house. Not my problem. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a strange mix of relief and apprehension. Relief because I finally put a boundary down, something I'd avoided doing for years with my dad. Apprehension because I had this nagging feeling that I hadn't seen the last of Harold's demands or dramas. For days after that email, I heard nothing. No reply. No call. It was like dropping a stone into a still pond. Silence at first, but I knew ripples would come eventually. And ripples came, all right. About a week later, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it, but something made me pick up. Adrian. The voice was tense, familiar. My sister, Margot. She's 2 years younger than me, has always been more of the peacekeeper in the family, the one who tries to smooth things over when Dad and I clash. Hey, I said cautiously. Have you heard from Dad? She asked, voice low. No, except that email about the power being off. She sighed. He's been a nightmare. The power being cut off is just the start. He's been calling me, your aunt, even some of his old friends, asking where you are and why you're not paying the bills. He's not well, Adrian. I frowned. What do you mean, not well? Margot hesitated. I think he might be struggling. I don't know if it's his health or just loneliness, but he's been more demanding than usual, saying things that don't make sense. I felt a pang of guilt. As much as Dad's been impossible, the idea of him being lonely or unwell pulled at something inside me. Look, Margot continued, I don't want to get in the middle of this, but you should maybe check on him. Just to make sure. I thought about it. Part of me wanted to close the door forever and never look back, but another part, the part that grew up needing my dad, however difficult, felt responsible. The weekend after that call, I drove out to Dad's house. The neighborhood looked the same as always, quiet, with well-kept lawns and old maple trees lining the street. But as I approached the house, something felt off. The porch light was out. The mail was piling up in the box. The windows looked darker, like curtains drawn tight. I knocked on the door. No answer. I tried the knob, unlocked. Inside, the house was cold and smelled faintly of stale air and dust. The power was indeed off. The fridge was dark and silent. I flipped switches, nothing. I found a flashlight and walked through the rooms. The place looked untouched for weeks. Dust on the shelves, a newspaper on the floor from 3 days ago. Then I heard it, a faint noise from the back bedroom. I moved cautiously toward the sound, heart pounding. There he was, Dad, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking smaller than I remembered, shoulders slumped, eyes tired. His usually rigid posture was gone. Dad, my voice cracked. He looked up slowly, eyes narrowing before recognition settled in. Adrian, he said quietly, why are you here? I swallowed the lump in my throat. I'm here because Margot told me you're not doing well. The power's off, the house is cold. What's going on? He shook his head, a bitter smile. You think I can't handle things? I didn't want you to get involved. You're better off without me. Dad, you need help. We need to figure this out together. He waved me off, a flicker of anger crossing his face. You left. You walked out and left me here. I'm fine on my own. I sat down beside him, hesitating before speaking. You're not fine. And this isn't just about bills or electricity. What's really going on? He looked away, silence stretching between us. Finally, he muttered, it's the house. It's everything. I don't know how to keep it up anymore. I thought if I pushed you away, you'd forget about me. I was wrong. I felt a surge of something I hadn't expected. Pity? Sadness? Maybe a mixture of both. We sat like that for a long time. Then, slowly, I said, we'll figure it out. But you can't keep doing this alone. That night, I stayed in the guest room. It was the first time in months I'd slept under that roof. The next morning, things took a strange turn. I went outside to check the mailbox and found a letter addressed to me, handwritten in Dad's shaky script. I opened it carefully. Adrian, if you want to help, come to the town hall meeting next week. There's something about the house and the neighborhood you need to understand. Don't ignore this. You owe it to yourself and to me. Dad, I frowned. Dad had never been one for town hall meetings or anything community-related. Why now? Over the next few days, I tried to get him to talk about it, but he was tight-lipped, brushing off questions. Meanwhile, the electric company had sent a final notice. Power would be shut off permanently unless the bill was paid. The amount was over $600. Dad's pension barely covered his mortgage and essentials. I couldn't cover it. I barely had enough to pay rent myself. I asked Margot if she could chip in, but she said her hands were tied with her own expenses. Our aunt was the same, sympathetic, but not able to help financially. It was sinking in. I was the only one who could do something, but I wasn't sure I wanted to. Then came the next shock. One afternoon, Dad's old neighbor, Mrs. Whitman, called me. She sounded nervous. "Adrian, dear, I don't want to meddle, but I've noticed strange things around your dad's property. Lights flickering, people coming and going at odd hours. It's not normal." I thanked her and tried to brush it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling something was happening I didn't know about. That night, Dad and I had a long talk, the kind we never had when I was younger. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want you caught up in it," he said, voice low. "But the house is tied to something bigger. The neighborhood is changing. There are plans, developments, money moving around. Some people want the land, and they're willing to do anything to get it." I stared at him, trying to absorb the weight of his words. "What does that have to do with you?" "I've been holding on, fighting quietly, but the bills, the power, it's all part of that. If I give up the house, everything's lost. But standing up to them has consequences." I realized then that this was not just about an old man refusing to ask for help. This was a war Dad was fighting alone, and somehow, I was back in the middle of it. A week later, the night before the town hall meeting, I was going through some old boxes in Dad's study when I found a folder full of papers, deeds, letters, legal notices, and something else. A series of threatening letters from an unknown source demanding he sell the property. One letter chilled me. "Sell now, or face the consequences. We won't ask twice." I looked up and found Dad standing in the doorway, eyes hard but weary. "We can't let them win," he said quietly. I sat there with the folder open on the desk, my fingers trembling slightly as I unfolded the latest letter, its edges yellowed from time and stress. The handwriting was jagged, urgent, something I hadn't seen from Dad in years. Reading it, I felt the weight of a conflict I'd been blind to for far too long. Sell now, or face the consequences. We won't ask twice. I looked up to see Dad's face in the doorway. His eyes were shadowed with worry, but also with that stubborn spark I remembered from my childhood. The same stubbornness that had made him both impossible and impossible to leave behind. "We can't let them win," he said, voice low but firm. I closed the folder slowly, the reality settling over me like a thick fog. This wasn't just about bills or old grudges anymore. This was something darker, something that went far beyond my own problems. Over the next few days, I tried to piece together what Dad was up against. He wasn't very forthcoming, a trait he never lost, but with some gentle prodding and a bit of persistence, he started opening up. Apparently, the neighborhood was in the middle of a redevelopment push. A large developer had eyes on the area, planning to buy up several properties and turn the quiet streets into some kind of commercial complex or high-end housing. Dad's house was one of the few holdouts. The developers had started pressuring residents, using a mix of offers and intimidation tactics to get them to sell. Dad refused, partly out of principle, partly because of the memories tied to that house. It had been in our family for over 50 years. Selling it felt like erasing a lifetime of history. But the pressure was mounting. Dad showed me photos he'd taken recently, strange vehicles parked nearby, men in suits talking in hushed tones near the property line, and a few incidents of vandalism. He'd reported some of it to the local police, but nothing had come of it. The power being cut off was apparently another tactic. The electric company had been pressured to send final notices, though Dad insisted he'd kept up with payments for years. "It's not just about the money," he said bitterly. "It's about breaking me." I could see it in his eyes, a man worn thin by battles he couldn't win alone. One evening, after a long day at work, I came back to the house to find Dad sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by a mess of papers and old photographs. The room was dim except for the soft glow of a battery-powered lamp. I sat down beside him, and for once, there was no tension. Just two people trying to find a way through a storm. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked gently. He sighed, rubbing his temple. "I didn't want to drag you into this. I thought I could handle it on my own, but it's been getting worse." I nodded, feeling a mix of frustration and sympathy. "You don't have to do this alone." He gave a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Maybe you're right." The night before the town hall meeting was restless. I barely slept, tossing and turning with a million thoughts swirling in my mind. What could I even say at that meeting? How could I help Dad when I barely understood the scope of what he was dealing with? When morning came, Dad and I drove to the town hall together. The air was cool and crisp, the neighborhood's familiar streets feeling strange and charged with unease. Inside the meeting room, a handful of residents gathered, some longtime neighbors, a couple of local officials, and, surprisingly, a representative from the developer's office. The room buzzed with a mix of polite conversation and underlying tension. When Dad stood up to speak, his voice was steady but carried the weight of years of fighting back. He laid out his concerns, the threats, the vandalism, the sudden shut-off of essential utilities, and the emotional toll of feeling forced out of his home. Several neighbors nodded in agreement, sharing their own stories of intimidation and pressure. The developer's representative listened quietly, then spoke with practiced calmness about progress and opportunities for the community, but the undercurrent of dismissal was clear. As the meeting dragged on, voices grew louder, arguments breaking out over the future of the neighborhood. And then, near the end, the lights flickered once. The whole room briefly plunged into darkness before the emergency lighting kicked in. A collective murmur passed through the crowd. Dad's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of fear. After the meeting, things only got stranger. On the drive home, Dad was quiet, his usual stoicism replaced by something fragile. "I don't know how much longer I can hold out," he admitted. I wanted to reassure him, but the truth was, I wasn't sure either. That night, as I lay awake in the guest room, I heard noises outside, a rustling near the back porch, footsteps fading away into the darkness. I got up to check and found a note taped to the back door. The handwriting was jagged and unfamiliar. "Leave now. This is your last warning." I brought it to Dad, who stared at it with a mixture of anger and resignation. "This isn't just about the house anymore," he said quietly. "It's personal." The following days were tense and uneasy. We started locking doors and windows, installed new alarms, and kept close watch on the property. I tried reaching out to the police again, but they treated it like a civil matter, offering little beyond suggestions to avoid confrontation. Dad confided that he'd always dealt with problems on his own. Asking for help, especially from strangers or authorities, was not something he was comfortable with. But I could see the cracks forming in his armor. One afternoon, Margot stopped by with groceries and a worried look. "Adrian, you have to be careful. Dad is stubborn, but this is bigger than stubbornness. These people don't just want a house. They want to erase the past." She pulled me aside, lowering her voice. "Remember when Dad refused to sell the family cabin upstate? He said the same thing then, that it was part of who we are. He's fighting for more than just a building." Her words echoed in my mind. This was a battle for identity, heritage, and dignity. A few nights later, I caught Dad sitting on the porch steps, staring out into the dark. "Do you ever regret fighting so hard?" I asked him quietly. He shook his head slowly. "If I give up, everything we've built disappears. But sometimes, I wonder if the fight is worth the cost." I didn't have an answer. How do you measure the price of standing your ground when everything feels like it's slipping away? As I looked at him, the man who'd been my harshest critic and my reluctant protector, I realized that whatever came next, I couldn't walk away this time. Just as I was starting to accept that I was part of this war, something happened that changed everything. One evening, after work, I came home to find the house eerily quiet. No Dad, no car in the driveway. The front door was unlocked, swinging slightly in the breeze. I called out his name, my voice echoing through the empty rooms. Then I saw it. His coat, draped over a chair, and the kitchen table set with 2 cups of coffee, cold, and a single envelope sitting in the middle, addressed to me. I tore it open with trembling hands. Inside was a letter, written in Dad's shaky handwriting. "Adrian, if you're reading this, I had to leave. They're closing in, and I can't let them hurt you or Margot. You need to be ready. I'm sorry I dragged you into this, but I couldn't do it alone. Keep the house. Fight for it." "Dad," I sank down into the chair, heart pounding. He was gone. Dad's disappearance hit me like a freight train. One moment, he was there, stubborn, tired, fighting tooth and nail for a house that was more than just a building to him. The next, he vanished, leaving behind that cryptic note, cold coffee, and a silence that screamed louder than any confrontation ever had. I sat there for what felt like hours, the letter trembling in my hands, 1,000 thoughts racing through my mind. Why had he left? Where could he have gone? And, most importantly, how was I supposed to fight without him? The house felt empty in a way I'd never experienced before. not just physically, but emotionally. The memories that filled every corner now felt hollow, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting for the next blow. I called Margot as soon as I found the letter. She was my closest ally in this mess, the one person who seemed to understand the gravity of what we were up against without asking too many questions. When she picked up, her voice was calm but edged with worry. "He left?" she asked, almost like she'd expected it. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yes. And now I'm supposed to figure out how to keep the house, keep Dad's legacy, and deal with whoever is pushing him out." There was a pause on the line. "You're not alone in this," Margot said finally. "We'll find a way." Her words were a lifeline. The first step was gathering information. Dad had kept meticulous records about the property, legal documents, letters, photographs, even recordings of the threats and vandalism. I spent the next several days buried in those files, piecing together the puzzle. It became clear the developer was not just interested in buying the house. They wanted it cleared, by any means necessary. There were reports of suspicious activity, unmarked vehicles parked near the house, security cameras damaged, even rumors of people lurking around the neighborhood at odd hours. Worse, local officials seemed conveniently uninterested. That's when I realized this wasn't just a battle for a house. This was a fight against a system designed to crush anyone who resisted. I started by reaching out to people Dad had mentioned, neighbors who had faced similar pressure, community activists, even a few reporters interested in exposing shady real estate practices. Most were hesitant at first, wary of poking the hornet's nest, but a few were willing to help. One neighbor, Mr. Green, an elderly man who'd lived on the street for decades, handed me a worn notebook filled with notes about meetings, phone calls, and incidents that had been brushed under the rug. "There's power in numbers," he said, eyes sharp despite his age. "This developer's got the town council in their pocket, but if we show up together, make some noise, they can't ignore us." Encouraged by that, I organized a community meeting at the local library. I sent out flyers, made calls, and even set up a small website to gather support. The turnout was better than I expected, a mix of longtime residents, local business owners, and concerned citizens. At the meeting, I laid out everything: Dad's fight, the intimidation tactics, the threat to our neighborhood's future. People shared their stories, broken promises, unexplained eviction notices, shady sales tactics. The energy shifted from fear to anger. We weren't just victims. We were a community ready to fight. I suggested forming a coalition, a legal front to protect our homes and demand transparency from the developers. The coalition's first action was filing a formal complaint with the city's planning department, calling for an investigation into the developers' practices. While the community rallied, I also had to protect Dad's house, our front line in this battle. I installed cameras, reinforced locks, and even stayed overnight, watching the shadows for any sign of trespassers. The nights were long and sleepless, the silence occasionally broken by distant noises, a car door slamming, footsteps on gravel, the hum of a drone overhead. One night, I spotted two men lurking near the back fence. They froze when the porch light clicked on. I shouted from the window, making it clear I was watching. They disappeared into the darkness, but the message was clear: they were testing our defenses. The legal fight was slow and frustrating. The developers had lawyers, skilled, ruthless, and well-funded. They filed motions, delays, and counter-complaints. It felt like David versus Goliath, with every move carefully calculated to wear us down. But the community held strong. Local news picked up the story, and suddenly, the developer's reputation was on the line. Pressure mounted, and the city council was forced to hold a public hearing. The hearing was packed. I was terrified but determined. When it was my turn to speak, I stood before the room, looking out at familiar faces, neighbors, friends, even strangers who had come to support us. I spoke about Dad, about the house, about the meaning of home. I described the threats, the fear, the attempts to silence us. I looked directly at the developers' representatives, suits and ties, who stared back with polite indifference. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. But that night, as I sat on the porch, I found a new note taped to the door. This one was typed: "You've made a mistake. Back off, or face the consequences." I knew then the battle had escalated beyond words and legal battles. It was time for action. I started by digging deeper, researching the developers' connections, their past projects, any skeletons in their closets. What I found surprised me. There were multiple allegations of corruption, bribery, and illegal demolitions in other towns. Whistleblowers had been silenced, contracts rigged. I compiled everything into a dossier. Next, I reached out to a former employee of the developer, someone who had left under suspicious circumstances and was willing to talk, if protected. We met in a crowded cafe, the noise offering some cover. She handed me internal documents, emails, and recordings that confirmed the worst. The company was engaged in illegal intimidation tactics, bribing officials, even forging documents. This was the ammunition I needed. With the community coalition behind me, a stack of evidence, and renewed determination, I contacted a respected investigative journalist known for exposing corruption. The story broke in the local paper, then spread online like wildfire. The developer was now on the defensive, their plans halted pending investigation. But just as I thought we might be turning the tide, I received a call from Jenna, Dad's estranged daughter who had been hesitant to get involved until now. Her voice was shaky. "Adrian, you need to be careful. They're watching you. Claire, she's not just some angry ex. She's part of this." I froze. Claire. The name sent a chill through me. The tangled family drama I thought was behind me had just surfaced again, mixing with this new war. When Jenna mentioned Claire's involvement, it all clicked into place like a dark puzzle finally solved. Claire wasn't just a toxic ex or a bitter family member. She was a strategic player in this whole nightmare. She'd been feeding information, manipulating outcomes, and pulling strings behind the scenes. Her cruelty had always been personal, but now it was devastatingly clear it was also calculated. The next days were tense. I realized there was no room for mercy. Claire had poisoned my family, threatened our home, and weaponized every relationship for her own gain. The only option was to cut her out completely, to sever every tie and ensure she never touched us again. I started by making sure Jenna was safe and clear about her choice. I told her there was no coming back from this with Claire. If she wanted peace, it would be only with us, away from that toxic influence. Jenna agreed, tired of the lies and manipulation, but I knew she was fragile, still tangled in years of conditioning. The children needed protection most of all. Claire's attempts to turn them had left scars I could see in their hesitation around me. We began counseling, therapy sessions that helped the kids find their voices again. I showed up for every appointment, every school event, determined to rebuild trust, brick by brick. Meanwhile, I gathered everything we had on Claire and the developer's corrupt network. This time, I wasn't just going after the company, I targeted Claire directly. I hired a private investigator to dig into her past. What they uncovered was damaging. Claire's history of manipulating friends and family, fraud, falsified claims to gain sympathy and resources, and even illegal tactics used in prior conflicts. There was no limit to her entitlement or her willingness to destroy anyone who stood in her way. Armed with this, I worked with our lawyer to issue formal cease and desist orders, backed by threats of legal action. We sent the letters not only to Claire but also to her allies who'd been enabling her. The message was clear. Any contact would be met with immediate court intervention. Claire, predictably, didn't back down at first. She tried to escalate, sending anonymous threats, calling neighbors with lies, even showing up near the house in the dead of night. But every move was met with firm resistance. I documented every interaction meticulously, ready for court. At the next hearing, our lawyer presented the evidence in full. Claire's manipulations, her harassment, and her attempts to sabotage us personally and legally. The judge was firm. A restraining order was issued, barring Claire from contacting any member of our family or coming within 500 feet of our home. That ruling was the turning point. Claire's power, the illusion of control she had wielded for so long, shattered. Her social circle began to turn away, unwilling to be caught in the legal crossfire. The charities she once claimed to champion distanced themselves, cutting ties and condemning her actions publicly. Even Jenna's former friends stopped answering Claire's calls. In the weeks that followed, Jenna and I worked quietly but steadily to reclaim our lives. We sold the old family home, the place Claire had tried so hard to destroy, to a trustworthy buyer who promised to preserve its history. The sale paid off debts and secured a new start. Jenna and I moved to a modest but peaceful house nearby. It wasn't much, but it was ours, free from shadows and lies. Most importantly, we rebuilt our family. Our children began to smile again. Trust blossomed slowly but surely, nurtured by patience and honesty. Claire's name faded from conversations, her threats reduced to whispers. She tried reaching out once more, after the restraining order, with a frantic email filled with blame and empty apologies. I didn't respond. There was no forgiveness to be had here, only firm closure. Looking back, I realize how much I underestimated just how far toxic entitlement could reach. how deeply it could wound. But it didn't break me. It didn't break us. In cutting Claire and her enablers out of our lives completely, I reclaimed the peace and family that had been under siege for so long. Sometimes, revenge isn't about vengeance. It's about protecting what's yours, drawing a line in the sand, and never looking back. And that's exactly what I did. No more lies. No more manipulation. No more family drama. Just a clean break and a future built on truth.